First meetings. One way of understanding Buddhist practice is to conceive of it as a long series of awakenings, some mundane, easily overlooked and only appreciated in retrospect, others more dramatic and memorable. Meeting Luang Por for the first time was the occasion for many awakenings of both kinds. Some people found the experience electric. For others, it signaled the beginning of gradual but inexorable changes in their values and way of life. Listening to Luang Por teach for the first time, a common perception was that his words seemed to articulate truths far better than they could themselves, that on one level their hearts already sensed, but which they had never been able to make conscious. The emotional effect of such revelations could be profound. Some people abandoned addictions or superstitions, began to keep precepts strictly, started to meditate. A certain number became monks and nuns. But not all were so ripe for radical change. In many cases, people were moved by Luang Por's presence, his charisma, the peace and compassion they sensed in him, but not so much as to take on board too much of the wisdom he shared. What stayed with them was the joy and uplift they'd felt at having been in the presence of such a monk, together with a strengthened faith in the Triple Gem. For these people, the immediate effect on their lives manifested as an increased commitment and pleasure in providing material support to the monastic order. There were also those who went to pay respects to Luang Por and were unmoved by the experience. Occasionally, people departed the monastery feeling disappointed, angry, or offended. Although Luang Por could be diplomatic when the situation called for it, he could also choose not to be, particularly if he saw fit to puncture a guest's self-importance and conceit. Often, his words or manner would shake the visitor's complacency and allow them to open to the teachings. Occasionally, it did not work at all. The guest would quietly leave, pride bruised, and once safely out of the monastery, fume at how they'd been treated. Although Luang Por's ability to find a way to get through to people was remarkable, he was not infallible. Sometimes people's confusion or attachments erected barriers that were not to be breached. The Buddha once said that if a vessel is overturned, then even the sunlight cannot enter within it. Luang Por himself was fond of the simile of the vessel full to the brim with water, allowing no space for more. Ta Sơi. Ta Sơi was so inspired by his first encounter with Luang Por that it led him to dismantle his simple wooden house and reassemble it on land close to the monastery. I first heard about Luang Por Chah from a monk I knew called Ajahn Chah. One day he told me that there are different types of monks. There are monks who practice well and correctly, and those that don't. Monks of the second kind are not true fields of merit. If you associate with them, you get no benefit. I asked him where I could find a monk of the first sort, and he said there was such a monk at Wat Ba Pong. Ajahn Chah took me along the first time. We arrived at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and spoke with Luang Por until almost 7 in the evening. I completely forgot to get hungry. There were a lot of mosquitoes, but I didn't notice them. After the conversation was over, Luang Por gave a Dhamma talk that lasted until midnight. Then, he told me to go and have a rest. But there was nowhere to lie down. The Dhamma hall hadn't been built yet. And so I sat and listened to Luang Por talk on through to dawn. Before Luang Por left on alms round, he told me to pick some edible leaves because the monks wouldn't have much to eat with their rice. He was right. When the monks returned, all they had, apart from rice, were chilies and fermented fish. So I pounded all that together, roasted the mixture in a pan, and made a sauce. There were about 6 monks altogether, and the same number of mare cheese. The chili sauce was distributed evenly and we ate it with the rice and raw and boiled leaves. I stayed with Luang Por in the monastery for 2 days, and then went home. I made a determination to go again. I don't know how he was able to explain the Dhamma in such a way that I could understand it so clearly. From that day onwards, I gave up drinking alcohol and fishing and taking the life of even the smallest creatures. Po Nupi. In an early Wat Pa Pong publication, a legendary dialogue is recreated. Written with a certain amount of poetic license, and apparently modelled upon dialogues between the Buddha and skeptical Brahmins found in the suttas, it relates how Po Nupi, one of Luang Por's biggest critics, was tamed and converted into a loyal lay disciple. Po Nupi was well read, unusually so at the time, and known locally for his knowledge and acumen. He took pride in himself as a free thinker, and in the village was generally considered a little too fond of his own views and opinions. On occasions, he would go with family and friends to listen to Luang Por's weekly Dhamma talk, but afterwards would always be critical of it to his friends. One day, on a visit to the Wat, Luang Por invited him to speak frankly about his criticisms and not worry about offending him. He wanted to know exactly what Po Nupi's objections were. Much later, Po Nupi was to admit that when Luang Por reassured him that he would not get angry whatever was said, he sensed an opportunity for which he had been waiting for a long time. If, he reasoned, he spoke strongly and Luang Por listened quietly, he would enjoy getting things off his chest. If Luang Por showed signs of anger, he would admonish him, "What kind of a meditation monk are you? You can't even endure a few harsh words." And so he jumped straight in, accusing Luang Por of being deluded. All religions are conventions, he declared. Their teachings are stories for children, made up to control people. Merit and demerit don't exist. Luang Por had fallen for this idea of Dhamma so completely that out of fear of creating bad Dhamma, he was hiding away in the forest and tormenting his body for nothing, rather than living in the real world. If he wanted to be a monk, then why not live in the monastery in the village instead of in the middle of a forest? Better still, he should disrobe and enjoy life. Luang Por sat through the whole tirade in silence, and then quietly repeated the Buddha's analogy of people cut off from the truth of things, being like lotuses submerged beneath the mud. He asked a question. If Po Nupi did not believe in bad Dhamma, why didn't he take up armed robbery, or perhaps kill someone to see what that was like? Po Nupi snorted that he wasn't stupid. If he killed someone, their family would hunt him down, or he'd be thrown into prison. Luang Por commented that that was why it was called bad Dhamma. On being challenged how he knew that all the effort he was putting into leading a virtuous life in the forest had any point to it, Luang Por chose to reply in terms his questioner might easily understand. Echoing the Kalama Sutta, he said that given the stakes, torment in a hell realm for a very long time, awaiting a wrongdoer if the law of Dhamma was true, assuming the law of Dhamma to be true was more intelligent than assuming it was not. Nothing significant was lost, and much stood to be gained. Luang Por's practical, down-to-earth answers gradually began to dissolve Po Nupi's bluster. He finally admitted that he wasn't really so sure about this matter of Dhamma. In fact, he'd spent so much time thinking about it that he felt his head was going to split open. When he asked for some guidance, Luang Por said, "The important thing to understand is that you have to sincerely abandon the bad and cultivate the good before you can know if merit and demerit really exist." When Po Nupi asked Luang Por how he might do that, he was told that with such serious wrong views, it wouldn't be good to give him any teaching yet, as he would only distort it. Pornupi had one more cutting rejoinder. Isn't the Buddha supposed to have more excellent knowledge and wisdom than anyone else in this world? He's the most sublime teacher, and you're his disciple. I'm the disciple of Mara. If you can't teach me, then you've got less wisdom than Mara. Luang Por, presumably smiling at these words, replied, "If you're sincere about listening to the Dhamma, then pay attention, and I'll give you a teaching to take away and reflect on and put to the test. Whether you believe it or not, try it out. You don't believe in teachings that you've heard from other monks, is that right? Yes, that's right. I don't believe anybody but myself. Well, if you don't believe others, then you shouldn't believe yourself either. You're a carpenter. Have you never made a mistake sawing wood? Yes, I have. Other matters are the same. Have you only ever thought and acted correctly? Have you never got things wrong? Never acted incorrectly? I've made mistakes. Well, if that's the case, if your mind is capable of leading you to think wrongly, speak wrongly, and act wrongly, you can't believe it either. Then what should I do? Don't think so much, and don't talk so much either." The text does not elaborate if any further teachings followed these words. It does relate, however, that over the following days, Pornupi couldn't put Luang Por's words out of his mind. He couldn't help himself, and the more he reflected on Luang Por's words, the truer they seemed, and the truer seemed the teachings of the Buddha. He could no longer find any arguments against them. Pornupi's conceit and pride started to wane. He abandoned his stubborn character and offered himself as a disciple of Luang Por. He kept the 5 precepts strictly, started to meditate, and became a pillar of the monastery lay support. Matthew. It might be argued that many people came into Luang Por's presence for the first time with such a sense of awe and reverence that they were fully primed to be emotionally affected by the experience, whatever Luang Por said and did. But there were also cases where people were quite unprepared for the strength of the feelings that he evoked in them. Matthew was a local woman, a scientist with a master's degree in biology from an American university. Meeting Luang Por was a pivotal moment in her life, and the first step to her abandoning the world in favor of monastic training. When the 3 of us arrived at his kuti, Luang Por already had guests. There was a monk there with his group of lay supporters from Bangkok paying their respects. The area underneath Luang Por's kuti was packed, and so we looked for a place to sit down on the outer edge of the concrete floor. Then, something really strange happened. As soon as I began to bow, I felt as if I was being bathed in a stream of coolness emanating from Luang Por. I felt instantly refreshed right through my body and mind. It was like coming out of a hot, muggy place and into an air-conditioned room. I stared at Luang Por, and my thought at that moment was, so this is what they mean by metta. After a few moments, the group from Bangkok took their leave. Luang Por picked up a pile of small black and white photographs of himself and distributed them. He told his visitors that since they had taken the trouble to come such a long way to see him, and although he had no real gift to give them in return other than the words of Dhamma, he did have these photos that a lay supporter had offered him if anyone wanted one. Of course, everyone did. As soon as I saw Luang Por giving out photographs, desire immediately reared its head. I was worried that there would be none left, and so I spoke up from the back of the crowd, "Luang Por, I'd like one as well." Luang Por glanced over at me as he distributed the pictures just for a split second, but it made my heart drop down to my feet. I realized that I'd done something inappropriate, exposing my greed in such a coarse way. When all the Bangkok people had left, Luang Por called out gruffly, "Where is she? The one who wanted the picture so much, where is she?" He caught sight of me. "Come and get one then." I crawled towards him, even though I found myself shaking with fear. I forced myself to glance up at his face. At the moment that I put out my hand to receive the photo, I saw that his complexion was incredibly warm and radiant. It was a face full of a genuine kindness and compassion for sentient beings. It showed no trace of the annoyance or irritation that I'd expected to see. My fear dissolved. From that moment, until the time that we bowed and took our leave, my ears were ringing. I can't remember anything that Luang Por said to us. All I can remember is how blissful I felt. Por Buapa. In Thailand, monasteries have always been the place that people can go to seek respite when their life goes wrong. Many people go to monasteries with a superstitious belief that a particular ceremony or offering to the Sangha will offset their bad fortune. But many who went to see Luang Por desired advice and wise reflections. He once joked, "Living here is like living in a garage. Anyone who has something wrong with them, or with their children, or with their wife or husband, comes to give it to me to sort out. Just like someone whose car has broken down pushes it into the garage and gives it to the mechanic." The Buddha called separation from a loved one a messenger of Dhamma. In other words, the suffering caused by such separation wakes people up to the truths of life that they have formerly been able to ignore but can do so no longer. One of Luang Por's most devoted lay disciples, Por Buapa, first made his way to Wat Ba Pong during a period of inconsolable grief. "When I got back from the war, I married a girl from Na Sum. We had a couple of kids and we were happy. Then the younger one died. My wife and I were overwhelmed with grief. I missed that child so much, I couldn't eat or sleep. It was sad, but life went on. Now though, I felt as if I was just drifting along aimlessly. I couldn't shake off my depression." At that time, Luang Por had been at Wat Ba Pong for 2 or 3 years. A neighbor of mine saw how much I was suffering and suggested that I go to see him. He said he might be able to help me get over it, and I went to pay respects to Luang Por and told him my story. He told me that everyone in the world has to die sooner or later. There isn't a single village, a single house where there's never been a death. Even in monasteries, monks and novices die. Luang Por told Por Buapa that he too must die, and perhaps in no long time. Given that his time in the world was limited, endlessly grieving and lamenting for the departed was helpful to none. Wise people think of the uncertain time remaining to them and find renewed meaning in their life through devotion to goodness and virtue. It's probable that Por Buapa had heard similar words from well-wishers many times before and been untouched by them. But somehow, when they were spoken by Luang Por, it seemed to him that he heard them for the first time, and the truth of them struck him forcibly. He said that me and my wife should work together to do whatever was of true benefit to ourselves and others. We should establish ourselves in right livelihood and steadily cultivate goodness and virtue as a supporting condition and provision for the future. As I listened to Luang Por's teaching, I found myself agreeing with everything he said. It was the turning point. And it made me enjoy listening to Dhamma. I started to nip off to see him more often. I learned many things, and my faith and respect in him grew and grew. Luang Por gave me jobs to do, helping to clear paths, cutting grass. I felt very proud to be his trusted helper. My happiness returned. Po Am. Some people were impressed by Luang Por's teachings, but were too proud and stubborn to accept them without a fight. One such man was the herbalist Po Am, who argued with Luang Por until he lost consciousness. Before I came to revere Luang Por, I argued with him for 4 days and nights. During the days, I was helping him plant a row of bamboo around the perimeter of the monastery. Night times, I'd carry on disputing with him right through to dawn. I'd say something like, "If the rice is my rice, and the flour is my flour, how can it be bad Dhamma to make it into booze?" And he'd reply, "You've got a knife. You can use the sharp side to kill and destroy, or you can use it to prepare food. The knife is your knife. But if you bring the spine down on top of your head, how does it feel?" So anyway, we argued for 4 days and nights. On the 4th day at noon, I felt dizzy and I fainted. Luang Por came to see what was wrong. I said, "I don't know. Everything's gone dark. I can't see anything." Luang Por took me by the hand and led me to the mango grove. Then he rang the bell. There were about 6 monks in the monastery at that time. He told them to bring a mat and pillow for me to lie on. Then he told them to put 4 water jars to the north of me and 2 to the south and fill them up to the brim. I don't know how long I lay there before I regained consciousness. When I tried to retrace my movements, the last thing I could remember was that I'd been at the Dhamma hall, so what was I doing in the mango grove? I turned to the west, all confused, and then looked about me. At that moment, I heard Luang Por's voice calling me from behind my head, "Po Am, Po Am." I twisted my head back and saw him sitting cross-legged on a bamboo platform watching over me. He said, "That's what happens when you contend with a monk teaching the Dhamma. You argued all night, you argued all day, 4 days and 4 nights. It's not possible to defeat the Dhamma, you know, and that's why you fainted." I was starting to feel better. Water vapor is a folk remedy for reviving people when they fainted, and it was making me feel cool, comfortable and refreshed. When I look back now on what happened, I see that I had it all wrong. Luang Por said that someone who lives in a high place is capable of seeing a person who is below him, but someone who lives in a low place can't see someone who is higher. I reflected on that. He was right.